For the second consecutive quarter, Nigeria's gross domestic product has grown, and this time by 1.4% in real terms.
But that's Jerry News. The National Bureau of Statistics says the third quarter growth is 3.74 percentage points higher than the rate recorded in the corresponding quarter of 2016. And what's more, the second quarter growth figure was revised to 0.72% from 0.55%.
Now, this is a result of revisions by state oil company NNPC to oil output. Now, the recent figures indicate a consolidation of Nigeria's exit from recession. Joining us now from our Abuja studio is the macroeconomic policy analyst, Professor Ken Ife. Professor, it's good to have you join us this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning for inviting me.
All right. The second consecutive quarter, Nigeria is making progress. The economy is getting some level of improvement. How should we celebrate? Should Nigerians begin to celebrate now that we're out of a recession and we're consolidating on it?
Well, it's mixed blessing in the sense that, yes, you can celebrate the nominal figure going up from revised 0.72 to 1.4%, which is still going to be revised somewhere down the line. Upward revision, of course. Now, the two aspects of this are, one, yes, foreign investors, some section of the foreign investors will be delighted that we are heading, there's light in the end of the tunnel and we are heading in a positive direction. But when you now take this in relation to the details of the, if you break down the details of the GDP, there are going to be a lot of cause for alarm. And I think we need to get to that level for viewers to understand the full impact of what was revealed yesterday.
Please go into the full details, because that is the need for the analysis at this time. I want to know the key parameters used and then what you just said, really. Let us understand it. Okay.
First of all, you have two sectors that are driving the growth that you saw. One is the oil sector that posted a very good figure. But you have the agriculture that gave you 3.06% growth. Now, the agriculture, for example, there are three components of GDP, three major components of GDP. You have the agriculture, which gave you 3.06%. You have the oil industry, the industry itself, that gave you 8.83% positive. But you have the services sector that was in the negative territory, between 2 and 3%. But of course, the services is over 53% of GDP. So that's why that figure weighed down the big growth that you saw in the other two. Agriculture is only about 22%, and the industry is about 23–25%. Now, that's why you got you normalize, and that's why you got the growth figure of 1.4. Now, let's take the agriculture. The agriculture is fair at 3.06, but that is not the ideal growth that you require for agriculture. We would need something more than 5% growth in agriculture. Why? Because your population is growing at 2.45%, and urbanization is growing at 4.85%. Anything less than 5% is not acceptable. Now, why again? Is you notice that the inflation figure that is going to affect some discussion we may have on MPC and CBN MPC monetary policy. The exchange rate differential in Nigeria between the surrounding 5 countries, Francophone countries, have made our thing very cheap, our food produce very, very cheap. We were exchanging at 1 naira to 3 sefa, now it's 1 naira to 1.4 sefa, which means that our food prices are effectively half the price. So they are importing our food like and now you even see one governor complain that 50 trailers are leaving his zone. Now, what that means is that if you disaggregate the inflation figure, while the core inflation is coming down from 12.5 to 12.2, the food is hiked up at about 20.4, 20.3. So that means that the average inflation is just marginally shifting down to just under 16%, 15.8%. So that is one thing to worry about on the agriculture front. The second one on the industry, there's a disaggregation of industry. The oil was even posting over 100%. And you can understand that because there's a combination of oil production at over 2 billion per day, million barrel per day, 2.03 million barrel per day, and also increase in price to about 62. So the combined effect of both gave you over 100% increase. But also, if you look at the metal and grain and the quarry, both of them returned a high growth of just under 30%, 26 and 24. So those two. So when you combine all of those, they still are tempered by industry. The industry is negative. That's all. The manufacturing industry component of the industry is negative. And that is very worrying. And then why is worrying? It's worrying because for the first time we are seeing a dichotomy between the Purchasers Managers Index, which up till now has been used to assess the wealth, the health of the manufacturing sector, seeing it at variance with structure, with the figure of this is negative, the other one is positive. It's over 60%. So there's a contradiction here. And the reason why you have that contradiction is because the structural factors in the industry, in the manufacturing sector, cannot be captured by the PMI index. So you now have binding constraints like transportation cost very high. You have cost of fund very high. You also have power very, very high. So all those constraints are not actually being captured by the Purchaser Managers Index. So you have two regimes, one saying that manufacturing is melting down, the other one saying that they're doing well. Now let's go to the services sector. All the services sector, most of the, look at even the financial sector, is posting negative growth, and about minus 6.57. And then you see others are posting negative growth. Now, but it's a bigger proportion of our GDP. So their effect shows a net negative on the non-oil sector of minus 0.67%.
All right, now Nigeria's debt burden stands at about 20 trillion naira, and we know that there has been borrowing and borrowing. The National Assembly recently approved about $5.5 billion borrowing plan by the federal government. In all of this, how would it impact on the growth that we are looking forward to moving forward?
Now, the debt profile doesn't actually worry me because within the economic recovery and growth plan, there are certain matching orders. One is to the central bank to increase net domestic lending to the private sector, following a profile of 10% to 19.9%, and then correspondingly decrease net lending to the public sector. But the one that is attractive is the debt sustainability strategy, because what that does is it rebalances domestic debt with foreign debts, so that the foreign debts will go up from 21% to 40%, while domestic debt will come down from 79% to 60%. And the net effect of that, the Minister for Finance says there will be a net effect of net saving of 168 billion naira, which means that the critical, first of all, the repayment schedules is 1.7% of our GDP. The Fiscal Responsibility Act says it must be less than 3% of the GDP, so we are safe. We are safe on that respect. Now, the benchmarks for borrowing, external and domestic, is actually 40% of the GDP. We're well below that. With 20 trillion, you're around 10, less than 10% of the GDP. Now, but the crunch is how much is your repayment as a proportion of government revenue. Now, that is the one that raises concern, because sometime 3 months ago, it approached 38%, where the deadline is 40, not the benchmark is 40%. It shouldn't go beyond 40%. And the reason is because we have a very low tax base of 6% of GDP compared to most countries in Africa that are between 15 and 24%. So what it means is that the government is aggressively, you can understand why they are aggressively widening the tax base, because you got to widen that so that the ratio falls, which is expected to happen. And also, if you look at the government budget for 2018, they have anticipated a higher revenue from non-oil than from oil. The non-oil is 4 point something trillion, no, 4 trillion, where the oil is about 2.6 trillion. So that is a good sign, because the more you can have revenue coming from non-oil, the more diversified is the economy, the less is the ratio between what we are repaying and the revenue base. So I think they're all moving in positive direction. But we need to talk a bit more about the financials that are holding the economy down.
And then from the analysis of the major components of our GDP that you made, would it be safe to say that there is need for more to be done in the agriculture sector, for more gains to be made, and then, yes, for diversification of the country's economy even further?
No, absolutely, you're right. The reason why I keep hammering on agriculture is because the interest rate here is so high, 28% to 30%. That's too high. You shouldn't have more than 5% lending rate to agriculture. Although there are lots of intervention funds hitting agriculture, which is actually why you are seeing the growth in agriculture being sustained. Anchor Borrowers Program, CBN's Anchor Borrowers Program is going to give more millions of tons of rice by the end of this year. So that's good news. But the issue is this. Africa Union in Malabo Declaration of 2014 has suggested that percentage of investment into agriculture, budgetary, should be between 8 and 10%. We are just over 4%. We need to have more money in agriculture. And I know that government will say, but we have more intervention funds going into agriculture. We have more loans coming from ADB, about $200 million. But the thing is that you need more. Why you need more is because our population is 189 million people now. Most of our neighbors are importing our food heavily. You can't stop that because it's bringing revenue to the farmers. And but whether you're getting it in dollars, I don't know. You know, it's not my business right now whether you're getting it in dollars. But the thing is, you are exporting your food. What the policy should be to get the value addition, because exporting primary commodity means exporting jobs. But if you invest on primary facilities, processing facilities, there is value addition. And then what you are now doing is that you are tackling the biggest weakness in our food production system, which is that even though we are number 1 in Africa in food production and one of the 5 in the world that produces more food than they require, 30 to 70% of that food never make it into the food chain. So, and it's because of post-harvest losses, not even including transportation issues, cold chain, all of that. So when you put your investment into processing, you keep the jobs in Nigeria, you raise the value, you reduce the post-harvest losses. Can you imagine that lowering the post-harvest losses from 30 to 70%, reducing it to about 40%, is effectively like doubling the production of food. So we've got to get that. And then it's just, you don't even need huge technologies. You just need small cottage industry scattered up and down the country, probably using solar energy. For example, the UNDP multifunctional platform, so that everybody is adding value, whether it's Gary that are converting cassava to, or that you are preserving, you are removing this 60% to 70% water that is being transported. When you are carrying food, be it yam or potato or cassava, it's the water that you are carrying, and they spoil the food within days. So that's why it's important to have a diffusion of cottage industries so that we can employ more people, millions of people, and raise the value of the food and longevity of the food and contribute to food security.
Thank you so much, Professor Kenny Fair.
Brilliant analysis there, really.
Good to see you from that perspective. It is water
Indeed.
they're just carrying when they have cassava in raw forms and yams. Professor Kenny Fair, macroeconomic policy analyst, thank you for joining us on the program right now. Thank you.